it's 2015, you've probably played The Legend of Zelda by now. It's a classic that's really stood the test of time, and I kinda like it.
Shigeru Miyamoto and his crew at Nintendo created something fully original, something that had never really been seen before. I mean, sure, Adventure came out prior to this, but it's not the same. Instead, we had a massive overworld filled with cryptic mysteries and misdirection. Satisfying jingles would play anytime you would uncover a secret, and hell if it wasn't a grand time. The original is probably still one of my favorites from the franchise. It was a sweeping and phenomenal success. But with success comes imitation. For every Pearl Jam, there's a Creed. The Prestige to The Illusionist. Weird Al Yankovic to Kenny G. It's everywhere. Video games are no exception. The Zelda franchise. There's good and bad, some better and worse. The entire spectrum is filled to the brim with imitation. There's so many that I'm just gonna have to narrow it down to top-down 2D Zelda clones, and that's still too much, so I've handpicked a few that I'd like to share with you. So for my choices, I've decided to single out a few aspects of the gameplay. There has to be a big and expansive world to explore, so sorry James Bond Zelda clone that no one knew existed, you're out. We also have to have some sort of progression that makes the player feel more powerful as the game moves on. Lastly, I'm gonna pick older examples, so more modern retro-style games are also out. Games like 3D Dot Game Heroes need to get the fuck out. They're fun though, I like them. This is a good game. Let's start with Nutopia 1 and 2 for the TurboGrafx-16. Nutopia, released by Hudson Software in 1989, is one of the earliest examples of a Zelda clone, and it shows. Despite the PC Engine being a vastly superior console to the NES, the actual gameplay is pretty identical. Our story takes place in the land of, Nutopia. Princess Aurora has been kidnapped by the evil demon Dearth, who has also snatched up the 8 ancient medallions. What do? Something about maintaining peace in the land? I don't understand why a medallion would have that power, but that's okay. You control our hero Jazetta, as the game is sure to scream at you every time you open a chest. Every single fucking time. You know what though? Nutopia is pretty decent for what it is. The music stands out to me quite a bit, especially the overworld theme. Zelda had this big and open orchestral feel to it, while Nutopia has more of a prog rock feel. It reminds me of that Ninja Turtles game for the NES, which isn't a bad thing, because that soundtrack was fucking great. Nutopia actually improves a lot of the aspects of the original Zelda, but it kind of drops the ball in the gameplay department. Controlling Jazetta feels incredibly stiff, even more so than Link. The hit detection's a bit off, and despite the game looking like it should support diagonal movement, it doesn't. The plot is barely there, with the exception of NPCs telling you what's what. You're told that the threat of Dearth is very real, but likely because of limitations on older hardware, it never really feels like anything happens. A lot of these issues were addressed in the follow-up, Nutopia 2, which was a direct sequel. You play as the son of Jazetta from the first game after nearly watching him die in a dream sequence. Storytelling actually got an upgrade. We now have more engaging conversations between characters rather than, hey, I'm an NPC, go to the labyrinth. The combat and hit detection is vastly improved, you can move diagonally, the music is still rockin', it's better. But unfortunately, Nutopia 2 came out in 1992 here in the States. That means that A Link to the Past had already been out for a year. Despite a plethora of improvements, everything in Nutopia 2 kinda falls short in comparison. You ever heard of Landstalker, The Treasures of King Null? For the Sega Genesis? That's what I thought. It's super underappreciated, but damn is it good. At first glance, you're probably like, ew, this looks gross, and you're kinda right. Aesthetically and graphically speaking, it's a bit muddy. The isometric camera angle can be a bit disorienting at first, and these bear people should not exist. Get out. But the gameplay's so good, the premise is good, and the music's good. You control Nigel, some elf dude who is actually a treasure hunter. Landstalker begins with Nigel returning from an expedition in which he stole the statue of Jipta, which doesn't have anything to do with the rest of the game. A wood nymph flies into Nigel's backpack while being chased by another group of treasure hunters, and in return for his help, offers to lead us to the treasures of King Null. Now see, that's the subtitle of the game, and that's what we're after, not the statue of Jipta, which was a prologue to show you how freaking cool Nigel is. So what does Landstalker do to make itself stand out from being simply a Zelda clone? First thing you'll probably notice is the ability to jump, like, all the fucking time. The way the dungeons are set up is built around mobility and verticality. Puzzles within these dungeons are based off reflexes rather than mystery, so you as a player have to keep on your toes and be ready to move quickly. Nigel's repertoire of items may not be as expansive as Link's, but he could sure carry more healing items in the form of E-Geeks. We've also got the ability to expand our hearts all the way up to 99, which is a bit ridiculous if I'm honest, but it works. Life stocks are found throughout the map in chests, bought via stores or other means. I'ma be real, Landstalker takes a bit of practice to master the controls, as to be expected with this type of camera angle. It's not as intuitive as one would expect with the action RPG genre, but once you get it down, things start to come really easily. Oh, don't forget about the music, because composer Motoaki Takenouchi, who would later go on to compose EVO and a few titles in the Shining series, flat out killed it. The orchestral movements seemed like they'd get bogged down by that Genesis sound chip, but nope, they rock it, and it makes me a happy man. In action RPGs like this, I've always preferred simplicity. Considering our plot is basically stealing treasure while getting wound up in island affairs and trying to get the hell out, I'd say they did a good job. Landstalker is great, and you should play it. On the topic of games that you should play, let's look back a couple of years at the Sega Master System and talk a little bit about Golden Axe Warrior. Wait, Golden Axe had a Zelda clone? Yeah, and it's super duper sorry. It's okay. First and foremost, Golden Axe Warrior is about as shameless of a ripoff as you can be. I mean, just look at this. I don't even really need to say anything. Even enemy types are identical. Come on. So the concept here is about as Zelda as you can get. The Death Adder, some evil giant, invaded the countries of Firewood, Nandoria, Altarulia, and killed all the royal family. You play what looks like a cute chibi version of the warrior from Golden Axe, and you have to save the world. Yeah. I don't know what to say besides the fact that this is literally a Zelda game, but with some slight differences. The overworld is actually pretty massive for a Master System game, and you get different weapon types and side weapons, so you aren't stuck with sword and board forever. The ultimate goal here is to collect the crystals at the end of each labyrinth to unlock a final labyrinth on which you'll face the Death Adder. Then you must find the, Golden Axe before you can win. It's a good game though, just very, very unoriginal considering it came out in 1991, years after The Legend of Zelda was released. Games like Nutopia had already been out, which I suppose chalks up any of Golden Axe Warrior's shortcomings to hardware limitations. You do get a good bit of fan service though, such as encountering other Golden Axe characters. Jesus Christ, did I just say Golden Axe fan service? It's an interesting piece of history to say the least, and worth checking out. While some of you may have a hard time looking past the complete lack of originality, the slightly stiff controls, and the grating Sega Master System sound chip, others might find something worth playing through. But let's say, and hear me out, you take away the hardware limitations from this era, take another well-known and established Sega franchise, and try again years later on the Sega Saturn. What happens then? The most expensive and biggest pile of mediocrity that I've played in years. Oh god, where to start? It's an ugly mess. The box art's very tricky considering we have these beautifully drawn characters. Then you load up the game and it's all like, ah! The music is so fucking weird, as was typical with early CD music. Like, oh, this belongs in Daytona, USA, or, oh, listen to these horn samples! One of the biggest faults in Shining Wisdom comes in the form of the game being completely devoid of any kind of anything interesting. Sure, there's references to the characters from earlier Shining games, but the world just feels so empty. You start off as name your hero here and start your first day as a castle guard. Shortly thereafter, shit hits the fan, this guy likes to sleep a lot, you're promoted to a knight, and you have to save the world. The plot's whatever, but the gameplay just doesn't hold together. Everything is built around this acceleration mechanic in which you must mash a couple of buttons on your controller to build up momentum to run and do more damage with your weapons. There's a lot of weapons to find on your journey as well. Too bad it takes 5 to 10 seconds to switch between them because of loading times. Seriously though, this baffles me. They couldn't incorporate a quick switch or anything like that. In situations where you have to use 2 items quickly back to back, you end up waiting on the game to make sure that everything is okay before you progress. This ends up becoming even more of a problem later in the game when you're managing your consumable items, orbs, and weapons simultaneously. It flat out doesn't work. Shining Wisdom should be good. It was released for the Sega Saturn in 1995 during the awkward and impressionable CD-ROM years, but it was panned pretty universally. And because I don't own game review magazines from the mid-90s and I couldn't find anything on this game on YouTube, I spent way too much money on this. Actually, Shining Wisdom is the reason I wanted to talk about clones in the first place. My time spent was pretty bland, and it was like, whatever, I'll just play something else. But then this happened! Yeah, the princess was kidnapped and a hero arrived to rescue her just in the nick of time. Isn't this story getting a bit tired? Hello? Mr. Miyamoto, can you please give the world a different plot to duplicate ad nauseum? First of all, you're a Zelda clone. Second of all, you admit in the game that you're a Zelda clone. And third off, someone who localized this game wrote the dialogue in there, and then someone else approved it. Shining Wisdom sucks, and you shouldn't play it. That's all I have to say. Go home.
There are a ton of Zelda-like games out there, simply too many to cover in just one video. In fact, there's a ton of imitation games out there, and this fascinates me. So if this sounds like something that also tickles your fancy, let me know down in the comments. For now, I'm gonna not play Zelda, or think about it.